The progress bar on the screen mocked me. 95%. Just a few more megabytes, and the Kincaid Empire's darkest financial secrets would be securely transferred to my encrypted drive. The 50th floor was a tomb of glass and steel at midnight. The only sound, the violent lashing of the rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The storm outside was blinding, but inside, the suffocating silence was broken only by the hum of the servers. I could smell the ozone of the machinery, mixed with the faint, lingering trace of floor wax. 97%. My chest tightened. I could almost taste the bitter victory. This was for my father. This was the end of Julian Kincaid. Click. My blood turned to ice. The heavy mahogany door of the executive suite hadn't just opened. The lock had been turned from the outside. I minimized the transfer window a fraction of a second before the ambient light in the room shifted. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, sinking into the plush carpet with the weight of someone who owned the very ground he walked on. "Working late, Eliza?" The voice was a low, gravelly vibration that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly against my ribs. Julian. I forced my hands to leave the keyboard, folding them neatly in my lap to hide the sudden tremor in my fingers. I didn't turn around immediately. I needed to control my breathing. The air in the room had suddenly turned electric, heavy with a tension that made it hard to draw oxygen into my lungs. "Mr. Kincaid," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat, betraying none of the absolute terror seizing my throat. I spun my leather chair slowly to face him. "I was just tying up some loose ends on the Q4 Werger report. I didn't think you'd be back after the charity gala." He stepped out of the shadows, the lightning from the storm momentarily backlighting his tall silhouette. He was still in his bespoke dark suit, the fabric absorbing the dim light. The scent of bitter espresso and cold, expensive leather washed over me, a scent that was entirely him, suffocating and intoxicating all at once. He didn't look at my computer screen. His eyes, dark and unreadable, were fixed entirely on me. He walked closer, his gaze dropping, lingering for a fraction of a second on the frantic pulse I knew was visibly beating at the base of my throat. My micro-betrayal. "A merger report," he repeated softly, stopping just inches from the edge of my glass desk. "You have a very peculiar dedication to this company. I like to be thorough, sir." Julian reached out. His knuckles brushed against a stack of manila folders near my hand. The movement was agonizingly slow, a predator toying with its meal. The heat radiating from his hand sent an involuntary shiver down my spine, a deeply irrational response that I viciously pushed down. "Good," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into a register that felt dangerously intimate. "Because there's a hostile takeover brewing from the inside, and it requires my undivided attention." He leaned forward, placing both hands flat on my desk, trapping me between his arms. The scent of the rain clinging to his coat mixed with the danger radiating from his posture. "It's going to be a very long night, Eliza," he whispered, his eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying clarity. "Don't bother packing up. You're not leaving this room." He knew. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't firing me. He was locking the cage.
The digital clock on my monitor flipped to 2 a.m. The storm outside hadn't broken, if anything. The rain clawed at the 50th floor windows with a renewed, desperate violence. Inside, the temperature of the room seemed to have plummeted, yet my skin was burning. Julian hadn't called security. He hadn't raised his voice. Instead, he had pulled a heavy leather chair beside mine, too close, entirely crossing the invisible boundary of professional distance. We were supposedly reviewing the Q4 logistics. A physical file he had dropped onto the glass between us. He leaned over the desk, his forearm brushing against my sleeve. The friction of his bespoke wool against my damp blazer sent a jolt of pure, paralyzing electricity straight to my chest. I stiffened, my breath catching, but he didn't pull away. The problem with legacy family empires, Eliza, Julian murmured. His voice was a dark velvet hum that vibrated in the quiet room. He picked up his silver fountain pen, tapping it rhythmically against the mahogany edge of the desk. Tap, 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 is that they are built on the bones of lesser men. My father understood that. I wonder, do you? He was talking about the company, but the heavy, penetrating weight of his gaze told me he was talking about my father. About my secret.
Vietnam's top text-to-speech solution from VB.VN.
I understand that empires fall when they get too arrogant, I countered, keeping my eyes stubbornly fixed on the spreadsheet. The letters were blurring together. My internal monologue was screaming at me to stand up, to run, to fight back, but my body was held captive by the sheer gravity of his presence. They only fall if the air is weak, he said softly. He shifted closer, the scent of his cologne, cedarwood and a hint of something dangerous, like smoke, enveloped me completely. I was drowning in it, losing the thread of my own vengeance. But I am not my father, Julian continued, his tone lowering into an uncompromising register. I don't destroy my enemies from a distance. I keep them exactly where I can see them. The pen stopped tapping. The silence that followed stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Julian slowly turned his head to look at me. I could feel his eyes tracking a single drop of rainwater that had escaped my wet hair, trailing down my neck, slipping beneath the collar of my silk blouse. His gaze was a physical weight, tracing a path of fire on my chilled skin. The air in my lungs vanished. "You're shivering," he stated. It wasn't a question, it was a command wrapped in an observation. "The air conditioning is high," I lied, my voice betraying a slight, humiliating tremble.
Vietnam's top text-to-speech solution from VB.VN.
"It's the dampness," he replied. He reached out, his long fingers hovering just a millimeter above the lapel of my soaked jacket. He didn't touch me, but the ghost of his heat was agonizing. "Take the blazer off, Eliza," he whispered, his eyes locking onto mine, dark and unyielding, "before the cold gets into your bones." It was a boss instructing his assistant, but in the dim light of the executive suite, trapped in the storm, it was a demand for absolute surrender. The line between professional and captive had just snapped. The command hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Take the blazer off. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to refuse, to stand up, to walk out of the glass cage and into the storm. But Julian's gaze held me pinned to the leather chair, as physical and inescapable as gravity. Slowly, my trembling fingers moved to the lapels of my soaked jacket. The wet fabric clung to my skin, and the sound of it sliding off my shoulders seemed deafening in the quiet room. I let it drop to the floor. I was left in nothing but a thin, damp silk blouse. The cold air of the executive suite bit into my skin, but Julian's eyes, dark, predatory, and entirely focused, were burning me alive. I felt stripped bare, not physically, but psychologically. "Better," he murmured, his voice a dangerous caress. He finally leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning softly. The shift in his posture should have felt like a release, but the tension only coiled tighter. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a small, sleek object.
Create professional voiceovers with VB.VN.
With a deliberate flick of his wrist, he slid it across the smooth surface of the glass desk. Clack. It stopped exactly 1 inch from my folded hands. The breath vanished from my lungs. It was a silver, encrypted flash drive, my flash drive, the one I had painstakingly hidden inside the lining of my purse just hours ago. The one containing the only key to the offshore accounts that would destroy the Kincaid family name. "You were looking for the shadow ledgers, weren't you, Eliza?" Julian asked. His tone wasn't angry, it was terrifyingly calm. "The ones detailing what my father did to your family's company 10 years ago." The room started to spin. The rhythmic pounding of the rain against the glass merged with the violent hammering of my own heart. I stared at the silver drive, my mind completely short-circuiting. "How? When? You didn't really think," Julian continued, standing up slowly, his towering frame dominating the space, "that a firewall guarding a billion-dollar legacy could be breached by a mid-level assistant with a borrowed algorithm. Did you?" He began to walk around the desk. Each step was a measured strike against my sanity. "I didn't leave the back door open by accident," he whispered, stopping directly behind my chair. I could feel the heat of his body radiating against my back. "I left it open to see if you were brave enough to walk through the door."
Create professional voiceovers with VB.VN.
I hadn't infiltrated his life. The realization crashed over me, suffocating and complete. He had opened the gates and let me in. I was the prey, wandering willingly into the predator's den. "Why?" The word tore from my throat. A ragged, pathetic sound. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Julian leaned down. His lips were so close to my ear that I could feel the warmth of his breath against my chilled skin. The scent of rain, cedar, and raw power enveloped me, drowning out everything else. "Because," he breathed, the vibration of his voice sending a treacherous thrill down my spine. "Vengeance is a very lonely business, Eliza, and I was tired of watching you play the good, obedient assistant from afar. I wanted to see the real you." He reached over my shoulder, his large hand completely covering mine where it rested near the flash drive. His touch was scorching. "So," he murmured, his thumb slowly tracing the frantic pulse jumping at my wrist. "What is your next move? Checkmate?" His touch on my hand was a slow, agonizing fire, but it was his words, "I wanted to see the real you," that ultimately pulled the ground out from under me. For 10 years, I had fueled my existence on the cold, sharp hate for the Kincaid name. Now, trapped between Julian's overpowering frame and the frozen glass, the lines of my identity were dissolving. I wasn't the vengeful daughter. I was a captive, willingly letting the predator in. A flash of blinding lightning outside illuminated the suite, casting our intertwined shadows onto the ceiling. In that jagged, electric moment, I made my decision. I stopped trying to pull away.
VB.VN, Vietnam's leading text-to-speech solution.
The shift was sudden, heavy with inevitable finality. I let my head drop back against his chest, my body giving into the gravity of his proximity. A shaky, ragged exhale broke the otherwise suffocating silence of the room. Louder than the rain, I could feel the hard muscle of his chest rise and fall against my shoulder. His breathing matching my new, dangerous rhythm. "Eliza," he murmured, the name vibrating through my entire being. It wasn't a question, it was a command. He didn't need to force me. I felt the heat of his gaze tracing a path of fire from my ear down to the column of my throat. The cold air of the room was gone, replaced entirely by the scorching intimacy of his presence. My internal monologue, once a relentless strategist of vengeance, had gone completely silent. Logic had shattered. The smell of cedar, smoke, and pure power was too intoxicating. I wanted this. I wanted him to destroy the fake, obedient assistant I had been. Julian's other hand, cool and strong, came around to trace the curve of my jaw, tilting my head up, back into the shadows of his face. His fingers were slow, deliberate, agonizingly thorough. My neck was a passive arch, a silent surrender. In the dim light, the space between us disappeared entirely. The electric atmosphere in the room wasn't just physical tension anymore, it was the collision of two forbidden worlds. Vengeance and obsession, melting into a single, suffocating cow-caught. I knew, as I let my eyes close, that I was crossing a point of no return.
VB.VN, Vietnam's leading text-to-speech solution.
The harsh, unforgiving light of dawn pierced through the floor-to-ceiling windows, slicing across my closed eyelids. The storm had exhausted itself, leaving behind a skyline washed in pale, cold gray. I shifted on the heavy leather sofa, a dull ache in my muscles immediately waking up my senses. The first thing that hit me wasn't the chill of the air-conditioned room, but the suffocating, heavy warmth draped over my shoulders. Julian's suit jacket, it smelled of cedarwood, espresso, and the devastating memory of the night before. My eyes snapped open. The reality of what I had surrendered crashed into me like ice water. I sat up, pulling the jacket tighter around myself, a pathetic shield against the glaring daylight. Clink. The sharp sound of bone china hitting the glass desk made my head jerk up. Julian was sitting in his chair, bathed in the sterile morning light. His tie was perfectly knotted. Not a single dark hair was out of place. The intoxicating, dangerous predator from the midnight shadows had vanished, replaced entirely by the untouchable, ice-cold CEO of Kincaid Holdings. He was looking at me, his expression an impenetrable fortress. "Your coffee," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the dark velvet that had unraveled my sanity hours ago. "Black, no sugar."
VB.VN, Vietnam's leading text-to-speech solution.
I stood up slowly, the silk of my blouse wrinkled and clinging awkwardly to my skin. I didn't say thank you. My mind was scrambling to find the jagged edges of my hatred. But they felt blunt, compromised by the memory of his touch. I walked to the desk. Next to the coffee cup sat a new, thick manila folder. It was sealed with a red confidential stamp. My silver flash drive rested precisely in the center of it. "What is this?" my voice rasped, breaking the brittle silence. Julian leaned forward, folding his hands perfectly over his desk. The power dynamic had shifted again. I wasn't his prey anymore, I was his accomplice. "That is your new assignment, Eliza," he stated softly, his eyes finally flickering with that familiar, dangerous heat. "Since you're so adept at finding things that don't belong to you, you are going to help me dismantle my uncle's board members from the inside." One by one. I stared at the folder, the weight of the silver drive mocking me. I hadn't destroyed the Kincaid empire. I had just been promoted to its executioner. "And if I refuse?" I whispered. The corner of his mouth curved up into a ghost of a smile, a cruel, beautiful warning. "You won't," he replied. "We both know you don't want to leave this cage."
VB.VN, Vietnam's leading text-to-speech solution.